Welcome to the TSD Mindfulness video for teaching number 9. First, I'm going to do a review of teachings number 6, 7, and 8. So teaching number 6, I talked about the temperamental body. I defined it, explained that our mental, gut, and heart fields work together to drive our inclinations and our emotional responses. And since these fields work together, the temperamental body is a system. And that's important because there's systems everywhere. I explained that the mental field is made up of beliefs, mental emotions, creative ideas, desires. And these aspects work together to create their own system. So looking at these aspects as systems can be helpful. I also mentioned the relationship between the mental field and the brain. The mental field relies on the brain's circuitry to process information. And we discussed the difference between the mental field and the mind. The mind is more similar to consciousness. The mind can move. The mental field is fixed. It's really fixated in this headspace area and very much associated with our thinking. The mind, however, can move. It can move from our mental field and move down into our gut field when we really move our attention and consciousness down there. It can move into our hearts. I'll be talking a lot about moving your attention and your consciousness into your heart field. If you study history, they say that back in the Egyptian times, that their consciousness was more associated with their hearts, and they actually perceived more through their hearts. And so it changed some of the way they did life. But that's something that we can do also. And there's actually a little bit of research on that about actually perceiving more through the heart. And so the mind can move, but the mental field is very much fixated here in our headspace. Teaching number 7, we talked about the gut field in more depth. The gut field responds in a binary way. So it's either content. Our nervous system is content because everything's preserved, everything feels safe, or it is not content. It's because certain aspects of our life might be at risk for changing. So just those two responses that we get from our gut field. They can respond in varying degrees, but it's either contentment or discontentment, comfort, discomfort, something like that. The gut field can be associated with instinct. What separates instinct from thoughts is that instinct is something that we're born with, as opposed to something that we learn during our life. It's driven by our DNA. However, our gut field responds as a result to our life experience also. So therefore, the gut field is not confined to just innate instinct. Our nervous system learns over time how to respond to different situations in certain ways. And we can unlearn that. We can recondition our nervous system as well. The gut field does not respond well to our practices of focusing on sights, sounds, and physical sensations. And that could be debated. I'm sure that you might talk to people who wouldn't necessarily agree with that, but try it for yourself. When your nervous system is truly engaged, activated, taking a moment to listen to some sounds is helpful if our nervous system is activated because of our own thinking. So if we're listening to the sounds, it kind of quiets our own thinking, and then maybe our nervous system will deactivate. But if our nervous system isn't necessarily activated because of our own thinking, then listening to sounds or paying attention to our breath might not actually soothe our nervous system. So instead, reassurance. The reason the nervous system is triggered is because it is experiencing some type of threat. And so the way we remedy that is to assure ourselves that we are not in threat. There is not a threat. It's also important to note that the gut field drives your behavior and your relationships with the people and the things in your life, just like your mental field. So teaching number 8, I offered a metaphor for the temperamental body, a seesaw. So the mental field and the gut field are at two ends of the seesaw, and they work in tandem, pulling us between simulate change, analyze outcomes, put plans into action, and make changes, right? That's the mental field. And at the other end of the seesaw is keeping everything exactly as it is in your life, really preserving. That's the gut field. And in the middle of this seesaw is this temperamental body, and the seesaw metaphor is a pivot point, and that represents the heart. And this is the crux of our experience. And so what do I mean by that? That in the middle here is the heart, the crux of our experience. It means that that's what's real. What's real. All this thinking and all this, lots of what's going on in our thinking is not necessarily real. As you start to work more with your nervous system, you start to realize that a lot of these gut triggers are based on things that aren't real. But what's in the heart is real. It's those deep emotions of rejection, a feeling of rejection, that's real. A feeling of abandonment, that's real. A feeling of love, that's real. A feeling of gratitude, that's real. So that's what I mean by the crux of our experience. When we tame our mental field and soothe our gut field, then we balance the seesaw, making it possible for us to really move into that heart area, into our heart field. And that's the reality of our experience. That's where our old pain resides. It's where our true joy is. So it is really helpful to move our consciousness there. That is the review of teachings 6, 7, and 8. And now I'm going to teach a new teaching, which is teaching number 9. And so before I move into the teaching, just want to point out that we are moving into the next list, and the next list is the desires of the temperamental body. So in the last several videos, we went over the first list of 3, which is going over each field, what it is. And now we're going to cover what each field desires, which really helps us understand how we operate. So the first item on the list, so this teaching number 9 is the mental field desires change. So I'll say that again. The first teaching on the list is the mental field desires change. So the mental field desires change because of free will and the ego. If change were not an option in our lives, then we wouldn't really have a need for will. We wouldn't have a need for the ego. We wouldn't have a need for the mental field. So do you see that connection? Our capacity for thinking, processing, for having free will, having an ego, that's all about us making decisions and changes, right? So the mental field is so much wrapped up in this idea of, it's with making these changes. And the mental field likes making these changes or planning or considering these changes because it gives itself purpose, right? If that's one of the reasons we have trouble just sitting and meditating and quieting our mental field, is because the mental field feels like it has no purpose. And that's kind of uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable for the mental field for most of us, right? So having purpose is tricky. I know that there's a lot of talk out there, energy out there about finding your purpose and so forth. And I understand that and I appreciate that. But there's also this path of getting comfortable with not necessarily having a purpose, or getting comfortable with not identifying your being with your purpose. And that can be tricky if you do that, because if something happens and you can't fulfill your purpose, like, you can just break down. So I would think that 15 years of mindfulness or more would have taught me that, right? A mindfulness practice will teach you that you don't need to have purpose, right? But it wasn't necessarily my mindfulness practice that taught me that. It was having an accident and literally not being able to do anything for several months. All I could do was sit on the couch. I really couldn't do anything. It was incredibly hard for me because I didn't have this sense of purpose. I felt guilt for not being able to do the things that I normally do. And I felt kind of worthless. And so I had to do a lot of work during those months to get to a point of feeling worthy, feeling okay with not necessarily having a purpose. And that's a really powerful lesson to learn. And here is kind of a microcosm of learning that lesson is sitting in meditation and allowing your mental field to be okay with not necessarily having a purpose, because during your meditation practice, the mental field does not play a big role. I mean, there's a little bit of the mental field switching your attention to different areas, to your heart, to your gut. But other than that, the mental field doesn't have much of a role in your meditation experience. So invite yourself to be okay with having a mental field that sits without having a lot of purpose, and being okay with that. Specifically, so getting back to this desiring change, the mental field wanting to desire change, the mental field specifically wants the ability to make a decision. Decisions usually lead to change, right? The mental field makes a decision by analyzing options, reflecting on the past, and makes projections about the future. Sometimes it's creative. So just pause for a moment and think about like all these capacities that we have in our mental field to do this. We have so much support, so many brain processes established to be able to make decisions. So we can be really grateful that, coupled with free will, we have free will. We also have this amazing mental field that has the capacity to make decisions. And which supports our will. So not only does the mental field desire change, it also has a wealth of tools at its disposal to institute change, right? If a large corporation sets out to make a change, it must rely on several different groups of people to guide them through this change. There's a group who analyzes historical data to assess how to go forward. More people make judgments and decisions about whether or not outcomes will be beneficial. And still other people use creativity to develop ideas that aren't yet researched. There's a risk management team, financial analysis, resource management. I mean, there's all these different systems in place to make these corporate decisions. So that's a good metaphor you can think about for your mental field. Like there's all these different capacities that we have here. So a corporation's powerhouse of men and women and the technology they use is a wonderful outward projection of what the mental field does when we entertain changes in our own lives. The more you do this work, the more you'll see the temperamental body outwardly projected into certain establishments in our society. And another example is the two-party system, the Democrat Party, the Republican Party. We might consider that the Democrat Party is associated with that mental field type of energy, wanting to make change, instituting changes. The Republican Party may be more associated with preservation, preserving things the way they've always been done, possibly, is one way you could think about that. Our mental field reflects on the past and projects into the future. It simulates outcomes, makes judgments about risks and rewards, as well as uses creativity to conceptualize and design, conceptualize designs never thought of before. So, for example, if you are considering to move to a new home, take a pause for a moment and consider that. Consider if you were in a position where you were going to be moving to a new home, how would your mental field play a role in that decision process? Might you reflect on the past? Might you analyze pros and cons? Think about your dislikes and your likes. Think about different options. So despite all the benefits of using your mental field when you practice TSD mindfulness, we actually quiet this powerhouse temporarily. So that's a big part of this practice, is we are sitting and just using our single point of focus to notice sounds or our breath or physical sensations, or with our eyes open looking at a plant or stacked stones. And we're doing this to quiet this powerhouse because it can be exhausting on our brain. It can be exhausting on our psyche. It can be exhausting on our body. So it's really good to take some breaks and allow this part of us to quiet, to find calm. The mental field is fixated on what we are doing. And often this is the point being, a lot of the time, it's not so important what we're doing, but how we are doing it. The heart is more associated with how we're doing something. The mental field is more associated with the what, on some level. So moving into the heart, moving our consciousness, moving our attention to our heart, it helps us be more conscious of how we are doing what we're doing as opposed to what we are doing. And since the mental field is very much associated with will, it is in our best interest to use our will to quiet our mental field. So there's so much will going on with our mental field, willing ourselves to do things. And so we kind of need to consider our will if we want to be successful in quieting our mental field. And if we don't, the idea is to kind of give your will a job, because if you don't, your will might just automatically move toward the activities of change naturally. So a job that you might give your will is to focus on the sounds, for example. So I've got a question for you to consider. What field do you usually use to make decisions? What field of the temperamental body do you usually use to make decisions? Do you usually really rely on your mental field? Are you doing a lot of projecting, reflecting, simulating, making judgments, even creativity? Some people might debate that creativity comes more from the heart, but it depends. It depends if the creativity is really based in emotion. The heart is so much in TSD mindfulness. When we're talking about the heart, it's really based in these deep emotions. So if sometimes creativity might be very much associated with deep emotions, but a lot of times it's not. And there's nothing wrong with that. Our mental field can be extremely creative. It's just not as emotional, for example. Or do you use your nervous system more to make decisions? Is it like kind of based on these nervous system responses? Or is it more emotional, like some of these deep emotions you're making decisions on? So just take some time to reflect on that, maybe even over the next week, just kind of noticing which part of the temperamental body you lean on the most to make these decisions. And this is the conclusion to teaching number 9 of the TSD mindfulness teachings.